Welcome to the Resilient Woman Leadership Podcast, where professionally minded women explore the art of grounding into the powerful foundation that makes us resilient leaders in business and in life. I'm your host, Kathryn Regganie, and I believe that when we women connect deeply with our truest selves, we can collectively shift our leadership culture towards compassion, cohesion, and true creativity. Hello and welcome back. Today I get to interview my friend Cherie Morris. Cherie is a lawyer by training who now works full-time as a divorce coach to support individuals and couples going through this important life transition. Her focus is de-escalation of conflict that serves individuals and family systems of all kinds. Welcome, Cherie.
Kathryn, it's my pleasure to talk to you today.
Oh, I love our conversations. So the first question I like to ask is really, how did you get into this specialty?
So I really appreciate you asking that because the work I do is all informed by my personal and professional journey, which I know you focus upon in your work. As a lawyer, I was able to quite often help people solve legal issues and found on the other side they were still unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
And it intrigued me to know that and to understand, especially in family conflicts, the solution is not always a legal one. So I shifted my focus, did some additional credentialing around mediation and coaching to find a space where I could hold conflict and help people de-escalate themselves to de-escalate this life transition divorce. And I found when I did that, and it really stemmed from my own experience working with people and going through my own divorce with children and knowing that personally I had experienced some of the things my clients experienced and having the professional credentials to address those very issues for them makes me know that this work I do is really one that serves my energy and theirs best right now. So it was really an intersection of the personal and professional, which I think really resonates with many people I speak to now. And I couldn't find a better space to use the skills that I have, but also some of the energetic and empathetic influences that I bring to the table.
Yeah, I love that perspective on how you're taking care of more than just the legal aspect of things, but really that energetic piece where, divorce is hard.
Yes.
You didn't get married to sign up for divorce, and it's traumatic.
It
And
is.
and to have that space where somebody knows the legal aspect of it and understands the emotional and energetic aspect of it and can really help both sides come to such a better resolution. I mean, I just think that's so important.
Well, thank you. And I think one of the things I find most impactful when I have the couple who may decide that this life transition is for them, even if one of them is, in fact, at the beginning, a reluctant spouse, what I find is we can take a setting in which we often frame there's to be a winner and a loser and make it something different, right? Instead of winner and loser, we really have truly a life transition where things will look different, but no one has to come out on top. And I think that once we talk about ego, things that get in the way of that, about loss and shame and grief, there's so many topics that we get to address that have nothing to do with the legal arena when we're really working in this conflict resolution and de-escalation area and focusing on what energy people are bringing to the table. So it really can be impactful if people are willing to dig in and do the work. And sometimes it takes a while, right? It takes a while. And time truly, I have seen, can heal wounds when we do the work of it.
Yeah, I so agree with that. And I feel, I don't have children, but I feel, when you're going through a divorce, it's so important to keep that perspective if you have children. It's not their fault. Is it really anybody's fault, or is it just that you've both grown so differently that it you might be better friends.
Right.
Separate.
And it's true. And I think for kids, there's so much at stake developmentally, right? Depending upon their ages and stages. So the more you can do to take care of yourself, right, at the front end and not to weigh them down with the burden of your stories and your perspective, the better we show. We have data, right? It's not the divorce that hurts kids, it's the conflict. So whether you stay married or get a divorce, let's try to keep the conflict down. And what are ways not to be avoidant, right, of the issues, but rather engage in a respectful way? So I see kids really developing skills of resiliency, being organized as they sometimes have to navigate two homes. There can be many positive attributes. As you said, it's never our go-to. We don't want that to be a first option in our families. But when things can be peacefully decided, we teach our children so much about how to treat themselves and others.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I had a conversation with somebody a few weeks back about that teaching moment with kids where, is it a divorce? Is it not a divorce? But it's really that conflict and making those decisions for yourself and your family can be really hard. And back when I did it, it was still really hard for me to make that decision, and it was just me. I didn't want to disappoint my parents. I didn't want to disappoint my friends. I didn't want to disappoint, myself. And it really felt like such a daunting um, experience that I hid. That was one of my areas where I just hid. I didn't tell anybody I was getting divorced until my best friend called me one day, and I was just happening to move out that day. And she's like, "Hey, what's going on?" I said, "Well, I'm moving out. I'll call you later." She's like, "Oh,
That is and thank you for sharing that, Kathryn, because it's not an unusual phenomenon for that kind of avoidance to come up when we're dealing with our own shame and grief over this very important life transition. Even if you're the one that knows this to be best for you, perhaps even for them, it's
mhm.
hard stuff. And so imagine, if you will, being the reluctant spouse, right? The one who's like, things are fine. We don't need to do this at all. So you can understand the anger, right? That might come up. Why are you doing this to our family? And maybe your own childhood experience around family is complex, right? Whether your family divorced or perhaps didn't divorce and they should have, or you had one parent who wasn't present at all. Like all of those complications can suggest we have work to do right at the heart of this that may or may not be obvious to us when we're in the midst of this very important life transition. So I really honor that you share that. And I think, as you suggest, bringing kids to it can only complicate it, especially if we feel like we have to overshare our story, right? It wasn't my idea. The other parent is doing this to you and they're breaking up the family. Or conversely, I have to do this because I'm really unhappy in my marriage, which kids don't need to take on, right, at any stage of development. So making sure you have a place to go with that, Kathryn, seems to be really important. And finding someone who can hold the space. And again, I just want to suggest a lot of that has nothing to do with the legal issues in divorce, right? Like this is around the emotion, the grief, the shame, all the things that come up for us during this time. So finding the space for something like coaching, I think is really impactful. And if I may, I'd like to share a little distinction between coaching and therapeutic work because
I'd love to hear that." Yeah.
I think it's really important because both things can be really important in this work, of course. But in my experience, therapists truly focus on where have you been? Let's really dig into the past and understand who you are, which is an important step. And in coaching, especially if you're faced with divorce, the focus is the right now. Tell me about your experience as a child, as a young adult, as an adult, and then I'm going to give you some tips and tools for the right now. Therapy can take a long time, as it should, to unpack, to unfold, to implement. And in coaching, we focus much more on the present. We want to understand where you've been, but we're going to give you tips and tools in the right now. And some therapies certainly can do that too, but I find the two can certainly work hand in hand. But if you are stuck in your divorce for some reason and don't know where else to turn, coaching is a great way to get unstuck because we're going to be right there and present to help you understand the lens you're using for the divorce, offer some tools to use another lens or have another perspective, and really get you moving. And I think in many cases, that's really critical to the process. I think therapy is important too, but is a different kind of tool than coaching.
Yeah, I would agree. And I feel like back when I got divorced, there weren't that many options. And yet I didn't feel like I necessarily needed therapy. I
Right.
was just hurt to the core of who I was. Um, and yet I suggested therapy at the time, but that was refused. And so I went on, but it was really interesting because once I finally like got over myself and started admitting and telling people
Yeah.
what was going on, there was support all over the place.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
It was really your story,
Yeah.
right? That was holding you back. As for so many of us, Kathryn, right? We get ourselves in a box, the expectations, our framework, when in fact, other people have this universal experience of shame, loss, grief, all the things. Even if we don't think they've had the experience of divorce, for instance, so much of what we experience in life has the same intersecting emotions. So being able to step outside, like when you told your best friend, was incredibly impactful, I'm sure, really freed you to see what those options are. And so I loved your expression, although I think you're being hard on yourself. Once I got over myself, it really is about us looking outside of ourselves and saying, wait a minute, maybe I'm getting in my own way, right? Like that's what I often talk about with clients. Like, here's the way in which I got in my own way today. How did you, right? And then sometimes it opens up a more fluid conversation because we all do it, right? And we can do it in many ways every day. But if we're really intentional about it, in important line transitions like divorce, then we can think, okay, I may feel this way. I may feel a lot of anger with my spouse, either because I want the divorce and they don't, or because I don't want it and they do. But what am I going to do about that? And how is that going to be good for me in the long run? So it's not to say you don't get to have your emotions. I think those emotions are really important. But what we really try to do is act in ways that are going to be in line with your best interest for the future. It doesn't happen overnight, as you can imagine, but it
Yeah.
does happen.
Yeah, and I remember when I was going through it, I was also in that corporate America, that corporate environment. And at the time, we were doing some software rollouts. I was traveling a lot. I had
Wow.
other deadlines. So not only was I dealing with this emotional burden of divorce, I also chose not to bring that to my corporate life because who wants to know about that, right? It was just a really interesting because I just remember sort of like almost being a robot, knowing that I had to hold it together somehow so that I could continue to be as successful as I was. When in fact, what I really wanted to do was go sit in the corner and hide.
And isn't it interesting? Because at the same time, you're not relying on the support, financially, emotionally of a spouse any longer. You do feel that pressure. And because of the work you do with people under pressure in the corporate world, I think this conversation and this piece is so important because I do think things are shifting, and you can speak more to this in corporations around personal and emotional experiences. And we want to make sure we're showing up in all the ways. So giving people information can feel very risky and vulnerable in ways we're not comfortable with. So I look to you for great advice on how you do that in a professional and authentic way, because my experience with my clients is when they have shared it in an appropriate way, they have been given the support they need through this difficult time in their lives.
Yes. And then the healing starts and the regrowth starts and shall we say, rebranding starts because, sometimes we will shift to a new sort of brand. It may not be completely different than what it looked like when you were married, but it's now you.
And maybe more authentically that, because it is just you. And you know, we can kind of get stuck in who am I if I'm not in relationship with this other, right? And so a lot of the work I do with my clients is also around, what does self-care look like to you? What do you want to do? And the first answer may be nothing at all. And then over time that shifts, right? Well, actually, I'd really like to go visit this friend or do this hike or take this trip all by myself. Like the universe expands in ways that we can't imagine as well. If we're co-parenting, honestly, a lot of times people can't imagine not having the time with their children. That's truly a period of grief and understanding. And then on the other side of it, Kathryn, I find people are thrilled to share that custody piece, right? So they have the time to do those things. And even if you can't imagine it now, I always say to people, hang in there with me. I promise by this time next year, you will be thrilled to have that week on, week off. And it's an exaggeration, of course, as all things are. But if we can build in now the conflict resolution skills so you can have a cooperative co-parenting relationship, for example, then you're going to find you're going to be more comfortable when your kids are not with you, so that then you can do the things in your career or personal life that maybe you really couldn't do in your marriage.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that piece too, because I've known several people who have been divorced now who are actually good friends, and although there's an official um, co-parenting agreement, it shifts. Hey, we're going to go on vacation this week. We'd really like to take the kids. Okay, great, take them, and vice versa. So it's, one of those things that's very structured at first, but as you start to get along, it gets a little bit more flexible if you can agree to some things. So
That's it. And it means being flexible yourself, right? And sometimes you have to be the first flexible one, and that can be extraordinarily hard and really good. So I always recommend a really strong parenting plan to start so that you have a default, right? As you say, when things may not look so flexible to you, and then you put the agreement away and you never have to look at it again, because that's generally best for the adults and the children.
yeah.
And if you can get to that place, and again, don't expect it in a day, sometimes not even in a year, but normalizing this for the kids over time, that families can look different, that you can still disagree and be respectful, then really, what are we teaching our kids but life skills that we want them to have forever? And we've probably grown as people too, because that's going to carry over into our work relationships, isn't it, Kathryn? We know we're thinking a little bit more flexibly in every category, I hope.
Yeah. And it makes it's so much sense, because our work lives and our personal lives can mirror each other. We've got to plan what's going on at home. We've got to plan project plans and program plans at work. And, they can be as flexible or as stringent as you would like. I
Well,
prefer flexible.
I prefer flexible, and it's interesting too. It's often hardest for us to see in ourselves, right? Those things that we aren't doing well with each other at home and at work. And my oldest child recently brought a work conflict to me, and it was so interesting because, of course, I'm his biggest supporter, Kathryn, right? He's practically perfect in every category. And I knew immediately he was getting in his own way, in the way he's gotten in his own way with me. And
Yeah.
so I gently and kindly, without becoming his coach, which he would deeply resent, tried to sort of shift the perspective, right? Can you simply see this another way? And sometimes, luckily, now he has a wonderful wife who can do this work for him. But it's so interesting to me how we can know it in someone else and not always see it in ourselves, which is also why I think coaching can be so impactful, because it should be a safe place where someone can bring an issue to you and all the emotions exist, and they're not going to feel shamed by the advice and the coaching you're giving them, the tips and tools. And I think that's the space in coaching I hope we create. I know you certainly will create for your clients, and that I hope it's a container that they will then be able to utilize in almost every other category of their lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love this conversation. Cherie, if people want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
So the easiest way to find all things Cherie Morris is deardivorcecoach.com. And one of the things I've recently implemented is a co-parenting academy, which they can also find at coparentingacademy.com or on deardivorcecoach.com. There are many ways to get in touch and be in connection with me right there on the website. I always do a no obligation discovery Zoom. So come and talk to me either for networking or to do work individually or as a co-parenting couple with me. I'm right here to help.
Excellent. And all of this will be on the show notes after the episode airs. And then if you're driving and you can't write things down, absolutely, it'll all be in the show notes. Cherie, I am so happy that you had some time to come and talk with me today. I really appreciate you and enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Kathryn. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Resilient Woman Leadership Podcast. Remember to take my Dragon Woman quiz at dragonwomanquiz.com. In just 2 minutes, this fun quiz will reveal your Dragon Woman and connect you to the resources so that you can leverage her power for good. And if you've enjoyed this episode, subscribe now so you can hear more inspiring stories from other resilient, wise women who will uplift and inspire you. Your review really matters to me, so please gift me back by reviewing this episode. Want more Kathryn? You can find me at energy-pathways.com.